Hello, everyone. My name is Adrian Alexander, Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves here in the Caribbean, and welcome to Caribbean Connections Success Stories. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Daniel Griffith of Guyana. He is the coordinator of the Inter-Agency Counter-Trafficking and Persons Taskforce. Welcome, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be joining you today.
Great. It's good to have you. It's good to hear more about what Guyana has been doing in the region, especially in this 25th anniversary of the Palermo Protocol. So,
Sure.
Mr. Grit, first question. I mean, everyone has a story, right? Many of
Yes.
us in this space in the region didn't necessarily intend to be doing what we're doing today. So, how did you come to be combating human trafficking? Tell us your story.
Well, basically, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on this program. It's a great privilege and honor to be on your program and basically to give you some insights to how Ghana um, efforts to combat trafficking in persons. Well, initially, I'm currently working at the Ministry of Home Affairs. When I first started, I was a research officer. I had a few areas that were assigned to me. Disarmament and security, primarily. That was my main focus area and the area of forensic sciences. After about 2 years, I was subsequently assigned to the area of trafficking in persons as the government wanted to implement more efforts and initiated strategies. And that is basically how I went into the area. I had a colleague who was more au fait with the area, and we subsequently worked together. And from thereafter, I basically was assigned to this area in a more stringent role, permanent role.
Okay, and how long ago was that? How many years ago did you
That
start?
was about, I would say, about 4 years ago. 4 years ago.
So you're seasoned in this.
I wouldn't say seasoned. I
Hey,
think
anything that starts during COVID,
yeah.
everybody got a crash course
What?
in anything during COVID. Mhm.
Yeah, well, COVID, I think that's one of the most challenging periods that we had in combating trafficking in persons. It gave us a lot of lessons to learn, um, and you had to pick up pretty quickly, to basically adjust. It was basically an eye opener. So I won't say a season because of the dynamics and the evolving nature of trafficking in person. It's sometimes, one situation in 1 year would not necessarily be the situation in another year. So um, we I can say I've gained some experience, but I'm still in the learning process as we evolve.
Indeed,
Yeah.
very humble. And really, it's true. The dynamics require us to adapt. There are
Yes.
new trends that may evolve in another part of the world. And just
Yes.
as so many things travel like lightning through social media, the criminal underworld, they have their own connections, they have their own ways of
Yes.
communicating and sharing best practices, you know.
Yes.
So you find that trafficking may begin to look a little more like what we see in Asia, for example, or in some parts of
Yes.
Africa,
Yeah.
um, evolving away maybe from sex trafficking and so on. And that, of course, means that legislation has to play catch up.
Correct.
So how
Correct.
long has Guyana had legislation dedicated to combating trafficking?
All right. So Guyana first enacted its combating trafficking in persons legislation in 2005. This was after we would have basically ratified the Palermo Protocol. That was done in 2004. So in 2005, there was a legislation, the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act of 2005. That was a sole legislation designated to combat trafficking in persons in Guyana. That legislation was subsequently amended in 2023, but within that period of time also, there was some other legislation that we also use that has some reference to the combating trafficking in persons act. So you would see some aspects being included, but in terms of the designated legislation, that was implemented in 2005.
Okay, so what is the nature of the main upgrades and amendments that were made to the legislation in 2023?
All right. So there were a number of amendments that were made into the legislation in 2023. Firstly, there was increase in fines and penalties for traffickers. There was the establishment of new offenses, such as persons transporting persons for the purpose of exploitation or trafficking them. That is now an offense under the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act. There is provisions to prosecute corporate bodies and instrumental figures within a corporate body, such probably a director or any key person that plays within this organization. There's provisions under the movement of children without any form of documentation, also particularly across borders. And additionally, there's a mechanism for the calculation of restitution for victims, for survivors of trafficking persons. So prior to that act, while we did have the aspect of restitution, what we found, there was a gap between how do we really calculate, how does a magistrate or the legislative arm calculate, or the judiciary calculates restitution for a victim. So in this new act, basically there's a formula set up that provides guidance for this purpose. And also the methodology that has to be undertaken on certain factors, such as a victim impact statement, must be submitted before the magistrate takes into consideration of the establishing a calculated figure toward restitution to the victim. So those are some of the changes. In addition to that, there is also the implementation of new forms of exploitation. For example, the use of children for the production and trafficking of narcotics. That is being now a form of exploitation and tip in Guyana. So you can be charged for tip if you use children to transport narcotics, traffic, production, and so forth, and sale of narcotics, also illegal adoption. So these are two basically amendments that were made. There were previously 9 forms of exploitation in Guyana under the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act, and now there are 11 forms.
Those are great additions because I'm thinking along the lines of the forced criminality that is increasing and often perpetrated by organized criminal networks. So you have, as you mentioned, using children in the production and sale or trafficking of narcotics. And you see that all of the time, right? Because
Yes.
drug trafficking is one of the main earners for
Yes.
criminal networks. So
Yes.
I love that that particular provision has been included. Are there any other types of forced criminality provisions, or is there like a blanket inclusion of forced criminality as a form of exploitation?
Well, in terms of, there's also the withholding of identification of a person's identification documents. Yes, I think that's the other forms. There's various forms that basically can come to my head. But in terms of linking to other crimes, that is designated to that. Oh, and additionally, there are provisions on, while it wasn't made in the Combat and Trafficking in Persons Act, amendments were made in another legislation to include in the act the offense of the smuggling of migrants. So that was also inserted.
That's good. That's good. And that's progressive because several of our jurisdictions do not yet have a formalized policy or legislation dealing with smuggling of migrants. So Guyana is on the South American mainland. So you not only have those who may come by sea, but you have those about 2 or 3 countries have their borders with you. So that's extremely important.
So that amendment was done under the Anti-Money Laundering Act. So the insertion was made to be included in the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act. So,
Great. Great. Earlier, you mentioned the calculation of restitution
mhm,
for survivors of trafficking, and you mentioned that in the context of two categories of judicial officers. You
mhm,
mentioned judges, which would be the High Court, and magistrates. Is it
mhm.
then that Guyana has legislation that empowers magistrates to fully determine trafficking in persons cases in certain instances and judges in other instances?
Um, the legislation it's included for both. So in summary, it goes to the magistrate courts. If a person is not satisfied, they can appeal, and it goes to the appeal court. So, but most cases goes to the magistrate court. The penalty ranges, but if it's in the magistrate's court, in the appeal court, the penalty can be up to imprisonment of life if convicted.
Okay,
So it's
understood.
not separate legislation.
Okay, so
Yes.
all cases will be determined in the magistrate's courts, and then if someone appeals, the High Court addresses it
Yes.
and could increase the
Yes.
penalties as
Yes.
deemed.
Mhm.
Okay. So at the magistrate's court level, I'm assuming it's a lot more expeditious to get through these
Yes.
cases than
Yes.
dealing with them on indictment.
Yes. Mhm.
Very good,
Yes.
very progressive. In terms of the legislation, now we want to shift to like a policy kind of
Mhm.
question. Is there like a national plan of action that kind of uses to guide its anti-trafficking efforts? And if so, when does it expire?
Yes. So there is a national action plan. Um, Over the years, we've been developing national action plan. There's one, the current one we have is 2021 to 2025. So it will be expiring this year. We're currently in the final stages of our new drafting of our new action plan. We finished the aspect of consultation with various stakeholders. So the new action plan will be from 2026 to 2030. Um, or we try to launch it at the end of this year. So we're finished the phase of consultations with various stakeholders, NGOs, survivors of trafficking in persons, the judiciary, and NGOs. If I don't know if I could recall if I mentioned that, NGOs. So we're basically at the editing stage currently. So we've completed that. So there's currently a new action plan, which is focused on the four areas, the areas of prevention, prosecution, partnership, and protection. Previously to 2020 to 2021, we had a previous action plan. This is biannual, which spans over a 2-year period from 2019 to 2020. But what we found when we had COVID, it basically put some setbacks. So what we realized, in order for us to achieve all the proposed initiatives that are set out in the action plan, it might be best suited if we do a 5-year period just in case we have some unforeseen event, given COVID-19. So we did not expect that. We could not have foreseen that, but it did prove a challenge in terms of our delivery of that previous action plan. So that's why if you would check, you would see previously there were action plans that were 2 years, and now it's a bit longer, just in case if we have a unforeseen global crisis that we had in 2020, 2019 to 2020, thereabout.
That was wisdom. And I think a lot of people have learned from what transpired during those COVID
Yes.
years. So we've
Mhm.
adapted policy, we've adapted so many things. I love that you shared that you have a broad range of consultation. And I just want to
Mhm.
ask, in terms of the survivors that you mentioned, is it that the National Action Plan is drafted and then they're consulted on what is there, or are they engaged earlier on in terms of the initial
Mhm.
design and so forth?
Yes. So what happened? So In Guyana, our mechanism to combat trafficking in persons, and I just want to give you some context to understand where I'm going. So it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So we have a ministerial task force, which includes 17 agencies, inclusive of NGOs, right? So, but there are three main agencies that deal with TIP specifically. These being Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Human Services, which is responsible for the protection of victims and support to survivors, alleged victims, and other vulnerable persons too. The Guyana Police Force, which has a designated unit to combat trafficking in persons, and also the Director of Public Prosecutions, who has assigned two special prosecutors, to guide us in terms of in cases legally and so forth. Now, prior to us drafting our action plan, consultation, we engage the Ministry of Human Services. So we have a discourse with the survivors. We have like a little group session, a focus group, to basically advise them, okay, this is what we intend to do. We're drafting this new plan. What would you like to see included? How do we, offer improved services? How do we enhance our awareness materials that will be more, appealing to the general public? So it's basically an engagement session at the initial stages. Thereafter, all the comments or contributions are taken into consideration. We develop our first draft. The ministerial task force meets as a body. We go through it. We iron out. We see, okay, added ideas, and we have like a first draft, a rough draft. Then there's another consultation in terms of with other stakeholders, including the survivors, where we say, okay, this is the first draft. What do you think? These are the areas. These are the areas. And views are solicited and engagement is done. So it's basically a bit of I would say a little long process, but it's also a very informative process.
I like that. It's a long process, and I think it's not something that should ever be rushed.
Yeah.
And the mere fact that you want to ensure that you have a broad base of stakeholder buy-in.
Yes.
I see the value of doing that. Have a first round, have a second round, have a third round, so that everyone knows what's in it, what their respective role would be, and they can lend support. So I think very, very prudent. You mentioned that there's the task force, right? And that within the task force, you have these three main agencies, including the specialized unit of the police service.
Yes.
So I'm assuming their primary focus is on prevention as one of the 4Ps and assisting, of course, in prosecution.
In investigation, yes.
Right.
Yes.
So in terms then of awareness raising, which of the main arms under the task force has that particular responsibility?
Okay, so in terms of awareness raising, each member is involved in awareness outreaches. But in terms of development of awareness materials, is shared between the Ministry of Home Affairs and also the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. There has a counter-trafficking in persons unit. Additionally to that, there's a subcommittee, there's an awareness subcommittee on the task force. They play a pivotal part in terms of developing awareness materials, implementing various strategies to conduct awareness initiatives, the work plan, and so forth for the entire the calendar year that we would set up. So this committee comprises of various members, including the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Human Services, the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, which is also the regulatory body for the gold and mining area districts in Guyana, also the Guyana Police Force, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution, and an NGO, a local NGO that is written here. I believe it's Food for the Poor, Inc. Yes.
Okay, yes. I think they're international, so they would have branches and so on.
Yes.
All right.
Mhm.
That's great. I love to hear that. And I was about to ask you in terms of the interior, because I know from chatting with people in Guyana that whereas there's the coastal area of Guyana that's densely populated and
Yes.
built up, you have a
Mhm.
massive area
Mhm.
of land where it's not as easily accessible. So it's good to know that the commission that deals with mining and would have its employees and
Employees,
its
officers.
agencies right in
Yes.
the interior are also
Mhm.
on board. And I guess that makes it a little easier to identify different
Correct.
forms of trafficking that may be taking place in the interior.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're all involved in training. We train the mines officer, and they also sit on the task force. So with this approach, we're able to get information, feedback from those particular regions in the mining districts in terms of where seems to be areas that the possibility of illegal activities be happening, trafficking persons being susceptible to exploitation, and so forth. So it's a multi-agency approach that is undertaken.
Great, great. And based on that feedback, what would you say are the most prevalent forms of trafficking that have been identified? And where
Mhm.
is that line of demarcation between the coastal area as opposed to the interior?
Mhm. All right. Well, in terms of the forms of exploitation or trafficking, if you want to put it like that. So although there are 11 forms, different forms, there are two main forms that we're finding. So there's sexual, in terms of sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, and labor, forced labor. Now, if you further disaggregate it in terms of sex trafficking, one of the main forms also is the prostitution of another that we're finding in Guyana. There are also some reports of labor exploitation, and that is basically skewed between forced labor and lab labor infractions. So what happens? What happens? And that's why I say reports. So what happens? Any report that is received, the Guyana Police Force, in collaboration with the Counter-Trafficking in Persons Unit of the Ministry of Human Services, does screening. You screen for the indicators of TIP. As you're aware, there are three elements that we have to meet. So based on that, it might not be a situation of forced labor, but more so a labor infraction. That information and that case now is then transferred to the Ministry of Labor, which is also a member of the task force, and they will take over that investigation and so forth, and labor and institute whatever charges and penalties. In terms of the areas, surprisingly, persons will think that we have a lot of cases in the interior, but based on the data, we find a lot of cases in the entertainment sector, right? So in the coastal region, there are you have a lot of cases being reported. This is not to say that there is not cases we haven't received reports in the interior. There are reports, but because of most of the persons are situated in terms of population density, is in region 4, which is basically the coastal region, where we receive a lot of reports from this area. Followed by that, region 7, which is one of the main mining districts, you have some um, reports coming out from here. You would receive reports coming out from that area.
Okay, so over the past, let's say, 6 years, so it takes
Yeah.
us just before COVID to present, have you seen shifts, any new trends emerging?
Yes. So prior to 2018, you would have had there were a number of cases. There were cases, not a, I won't say a number of cases. There were cases involving nationals, foreign nationals from the more of the Caribbean and Guyanese national. Guyanese national. And when I say, and if the further disaggregated to Guyanese national, persons from the indigenous communities or Amerindian communities, it would be from the local persons. Prior, thereafter, around 18, there was a shift. We started to see more cases involving nationals from Venezuela. Because of the economic crisis, the persons are more susceptible. They came to Guyana, and we started to receive more reports skewed to that. So that has been the shift. More foreign nationals, we're finding reported cases involving more foreign national than in Guyanese nationals, particularly from South America.
Okay, and that continues to this day. You mentioned earlier you found more Caribbean people. Would that be general Caribbean people from different, like widely
So
dispersed or
no,
specific?
so we had a few cases. We would find cases involving reports in terms of persons coming from the Dominican Republic. In comparison to other Caribbean countries, we had 1 or 2 reports coming in from other persons. So this is based on screening and reports that we receive. So every report that we receive, a screening is done. So to ensure that there are no elements. And this is done by the Guyana Police Force TIP unit, but there's also screening at the immigration ports of entry. Also done.
Great. I remember reading something, it's been a couple of years ago, in terms of some Haitian nationals who identified in Guyana's, but I think they came across the border from, was it Suriname or French Guyana, something of that nature. So they didn't directly enter Guyana through legal means. I think they were probably smuggled into Guyana afterwards. Yeah, speaking with colleagues in Jamaica and several other territories, they also report the presence of Haitian nationals who were screened and identified as being victims of trafficking and so on as well.
Yeah. Well, once any foreign national that enters Guyana, once they present themselves, once they come through the legal means of official ports of entry, they will be screened at the various ports of entry. Unfortunately, if they are smuggled and they do not, they come across illegally, at least that first mechanism for screening is not really implemented.
In terms of the victims identified, what is the breakdown in terms of age, child versus adult numbers, and male versus female?
All right. So in terms of let's be good in terms of the age, what we're finding, it's mostly skewed between the ages of around 17 to about 32. Just to give you an age range. There are one and two cases involving persons between the age of 15 to 17. Last year, there was one case, but majority of the cases that we're finding is between 17, 18 to about 32. And it's highly skewed to females and young girls. However, when we go for the past 2 years, we've seen increased reports involving males and the form of labor exploitation. So we've determined that this may be primarily to 2 reasons: increase awareness and inspections of various construction sites. As you know, we had a massive infrastructure boom, so the officers are going out into the field. They engage with on construction site, mining districts, in the forestry districts, and various sites So screening is done in these areas. And once screening is done, in some instances, you might detect one or two reports. It's not labor trafficking, but it could be a state of labor infraction or something. Some person might not be getting the agreed wages and so forth. But in terms of forced labor, um, there's also been increased cases in terms of forced labor also um, over the past 2 years. And this is mostly skewed to males. But looking at it overall, holistically, the data is showing us it's predominantly women and young girls are most susceptible to being exploited or becoming victims of trafficking persons, or we've received reports with regards to that.
Okay, and I know in many jurisdictions the provision of services is directed towards meeting the needs of female victims,
Mhm.
largely because in our region there's a higher number of victims identified for trafficking for sexual exploitation than other forms
Yes.
of exploitation.
Mhm.
Does Guyana have dedicated shelters for victims of trafficking, and if so, also for male victims?
Yes. Yes. I must say. So we have four core shelters. The government of Guyana has four core shelters, and one is specifically dedicated for men. So the services are provided for both um, women and men, and young children. But there's one particular shelter, the specialized shelter that is dedicated to men. So yes, we have
Great.
a shelter.
That is so important.
In in addition to the four core shelters, there is also transitional facilities, transitional centers, which is we actually in the phase of completing one to the sum of 340,000 US dollars, or about 60 to 75 million Guyana dollars. That's in the final stages of completion. Um, and also shortly, we are looking to establish more transitional centers and shelters outside of the main in the hinterland locations, in the mining, the checkpoints in the mining locations.
That's
Right?
excellent.
Because of the distance in some instances, it's if I don't well, I'm pretty sure that you came to Ghana, you know, although Ghana is small, 83,000 square miles, pretty big too. So it's really
Yes.
big. So it's really vast.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking along the lines of what you said was part of the 2023 amendment to your legislation. When
Yes.
you have instances of forced criminality, especially in the production or sale and trafficking of narcotics, you find a
Mhm.
lot of young men who may be involved in that. Not only young men, but primarily young men. So
Mhm.
having the shelters and the infrastructure there in place for them makes a
Yeah.
whole lot of sense
Makes
because it
sense.
means that you're
Yes.
not going to be scrambling for a place to
Yes.
put them when the reports come in and you are able to verify that. So great
Yes.
work. Great, great work. In terms of trafficking prosecutions, though,
Mhm.
how has that been for Guyana? Because we discussed earlier, it's done a lot in the magistrate's court and it can expedite the process. But
Yes.
what would you say are the rates of convictions and some of your more famous cases, those that stand out in terms of landmark prosecutions and convictions?
Well, while we have some successes in prosecution, we're also having challenges in that area, like any other country in the Caribbean and in the rest of the world. Our biggest challenge is the unwillingness, or I guess, victims not willing to testify and cooperate with law enforcement officials. And this could be for various reasons, fear, and not necessarily fear in here, but fear or threats from other elements to the family in another country, which will have a jurisdiction issue, since it's not in Guyana, the family or relatives are not in Guyana. So we're having some challenges, but we've had some successes in prosecution. One case I could recall is a conviction of a female foreign national who, and this is interesting too because, and there's also another trend, what we're finding is that these foreign nationals are also being actively more involved in recruiting their country fellow men and women. So they're playing, I think, even a bigger role now in terms of particularly the recruitment side and assisting in the transport and the exploitation, and the locals, the Guyanese nationals who we've arrested are more active in the transportation, the transport of these persons in and out of Guyana. So there was one particular case, and I could recall it was extreme because the perpetrator was threatening the victims. Unfortunately, the relative of the relatives were not living in Guyana. Um, they were abroad, so they were threatening their family. It seems this perpetrator had some sort of connections, organized connections overseas. So we had to basically, the law enforcement authorities had to basically address and see how much cooperation they could have get to, protect their relatives and so forth. The victim subsequently testified and we were able to get a conviction. So we have complexities like this. This is also in the area of prosecutions. We're finding foreign nationals are also being involved, particularly the nationals from within close borders here in Guyana, close to Guyana. So it has been a challenge. It has been a challenge over the years, and I think we still have those challenges experiencing.
Okay. In terms then of the four Ps, right? So we're
Hmm.
zooming out from the prosecutions and so on. You mentioned earlier that you have CSOs, civil society organizations involved in developing a national um, action plan and so on. What are the other areas of engagement with civil society and survivors beyond helping to develop the national action plan?
Well, the civil, we have NGOs that also help us in provision of shelter services, particularly in regions that we far-flung regions. In the hinterland regions, they also support us in some cases of forensic interviews of victims involving children and reports in terms of we engage with them with in terms of awareness. They help in terms of help us support with awareness, reports, and so forth. So we partner a lot with a lot of NGOs.
And with survivors as well, and apart from
Yes,
the
yes,
National Action
survivors,
Plan.
yes, yes,
Right.
survivors. Employment. We've had survivors being employed with the unit, the respective units. Um, Survivors being involved in awareness campaigns and so forth. There's also a lot of advocacy that is done with survivors, along with them, they partner with them, opportunities, scholarships, and so forth, and entrepreneurship grants that are given to survivors.
Great. And a lot of those sound like they may form part of my next question, which
Mhm.
is like, Ghana has done so much from what you've been sharing with us. What would you say if you have to prioritize the seven most outstanding achievements of the Guyana government in the implementation of the Palermo Protocol?
I think we would want to prioritize more in terms of give more emphasis on support, victim support. Um, in terms of this is key for us. I mean, we've done a lot, but it's always important that we continue to support survivors in a sustainable way, in a long-term way, because they can be, a testament to other persons who they may have knowledge that is going through the same thing that, it's okay to come and report a case. This is my experience, this is what is my outcome, and so forth. So I think some more work we require, we're working with that to offer more support in the areas of advanced investigations. Things are evolving. We need to use the use of technology in our investigations and advance in terms of techniques and so forth. So I think those are two areas that not only priority, but it requires continuous, work, continuous efforts, revolving efforts. You need to take a step back, re-strategize, and so forth. So what I can say is the same approach that law enforcement officials would have taken in 2000 and probably about 2 years back to combat trafficking in person is not the same approach that's taken today. Because as you know, things are changing, and especially in Guyana, we're in the cusp of a massive development, both economically and infrastructure-wise and so forth. And we have a massive influx of migrants also that is coming into our country with different cultures, different perspectives, different ways of things. And while most persons are, coming for better economic opportunities and opportunities in general, you will have one, two that will slip through the cracks in terms of wanting to be, involved in criminal acts. So all of these things, and with that, they come with a probably sophisticated way of doing things. So we need to take these things into consideration and keep evolving and advancing. And as technology improves at a rapid pace, that needs to be also need to take into consideration. A few years ago, we didn't Facebook, social media wasn't an issue, we would say. It was there, but it wasn't a big challenge. But now, that's one can be deemed as not only subject to Guyana, but across the Caribbean and other countries as one of the main recruiting tools that traffickers might use to. So it requires now the aspect of cybersecurity to be involved, to monitoring, some site monitoring, the use of AI. So we monitor probably suspicious advertisements and so forth. So I think in terms of priority, that is our intended focus to go to that level.
So those are excellent things to point out for areas for improvement, right?
Yes.
So we can end on a high note.
Yes.
What would you consider to be the 7 most prominent success stories for Guyana?
Our legislation. I think we have a robust legislation in place. This is complemented with various regulations and SOPs. So there are guidelines toward investigation and prosecution of trafficking in persons, and also the identification and protection of victims and survivors of trafficking in persons. So, and that is tied into the regulations, the Combating Trafficking in Persons Act through the regulation section. So it's basically law. The drafting and the creation of a key policy document or action plan, the support that we offer to victims. There's wide range of support that is offered to victims, including from legal, medical, economic, um, grants, educational, housing, shelter, both on a long-term basis and on a short-term basis. And additionally, the government of Guyana's continued investment of resources into combating trafficking in persons. Over the years, we've seen increased financial resources being um, allocated to combating trafficking in persons, and not also trafficking in persons, the smuggling of migrants. As I alluded earlier, we recently conclude we're in final stages, just basically furnishing of a new transitional center, which is to the tune of almost 300 or above 350,000 US dollars. The increased human capacity, particularly personal bilingual capabilities. So because we have, I can't speak for other Caribbean countries, but because the data is showing to us, we have a lot of foreign nationals. At some point, a few years back, a couple well years back, the language barrier was a challenge for us. But now it's not really a challenge because we've increased, human resources capacity, hire translators, bilingual officers, and so forth, invest in courses and so forth. So all that in terms of resources, human and capital resources, I think is one of the key things. And the support that is given to combat trafficking in persons in Guyana. So those are some of the key things I think to our achievement, or the proactive approach also from the various stakeholders, particularly the law enforcement officers. They have a very proactive approach to combating trafficking persons. All the stakeholders, the task force, the establishment of a task force, and so forth. So they go out into the fields, engage persons, conduct spot inspections, operations, and so forth. So those are just some of the things off the top of my head. Um, um, I think are key achievements in our fight, in our, strategy to eradicate human trafficking in Guyana.
Thank you so very kindly, Mr. Griffith. And indeed, a lot is being done, as you mentioned. Guyana has held the tier one position on the U.S. Department of
Yes,
State's Trafficking Persons Report for a number of years, maybe like 8, 9
yes.
years or something like that.
Eight,
Yeah,
eight consecutive years. And that's
right.
also one of our key achievements.
Yes.
We're proud of it. It requires hard work. Um, and we will continue to implement our various strategies. So for 8 years, we've been able to achieve tier one. Um, it's not a simple task. It's a challenging issue, but we continue to work tirelessly.
Well, congratulations to you and
Thank you.
all of the members of the task force, and indeed for the country, because it
Yes.
sounds as though you've had success with a broad-based approach. So it's you said what 17 or so different agencies on the task force. So you're looking at almost whole of government, all of society approach,
Yes.
engaging everyone to be on the
Yeah.
lookout and to be able to identify and respond to reports of trafficking in prison. So
Correct.
yeah, so we could leave it there. And I'd love to wish you and the people of Guyana a happy World Day Against Trafficking in Persons coming up on the 30th of July. I'm sure you have tons of activities that you have to
Yes.
continue planning and executing between now
Yes.
and then. So, Mr. Griffith, thank you so very kindly. And we've
Oh,
been chatting with Mr. Daniel Griffith, coordinator at the Inter-Agency Counter-Trafficking Persons Task Force under the Ministry of Home Affairs in Guyana. This is part of our Caribbean Connection Success Stories series. And if you're viewing this, it it will be on or after the World Day Against Trafficking in Persons as well as the conference recordings from our recently concluded Caribbean Anti-Trafficking Conference. So definitely continue checking our YouTube channel as we add additional government representatives to talk about what they also are doing in this 25th anniversary year of the implementation of the Palermo Protocol. So, Mr. Griffith, thanks so much for taking the
Thank you.
time to speak with us.
Thank you so much, Adrian. Thank you so much. It's
All
been a
right.
privilege. Thank you.
Indeed.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye. Have a
Bye-bye.
great weekend.
Bye-bye. You too.
Thank you.